you look at the defensive line, a lot of returners. Obviously, the key loss, a couple of big losses for this unit is Derek Parrish, who played a limited amount last season, but even in those 4 games that he did play, he was a monster for the Houston Cougars, just a disruptor. Just look at the game that he had against Texas Tech. And, of course, DeAnthony Jones, big loss for him, a consistent face that Houston has been able to have. Obviously, both of those players have transitioned on to pursue their professional careers. When you look at the key returners for Houston, I think you got to start with 2 names. That's Nelson Caesar, who is going to be tasked with potentially stepping into the shoes of either a Derek Parrish or a DeAnthony Jones. Of course, when it comes to the interior line, Chidozie Onwuakwo, who consistently started 12 out of the 13 games for Houston, doesn't necessarily have the big stats, but he plays a very key, important role for the Houston Cougars defensive line, specifically when it comes to stopping their opposing team's runs. And he draws a lot of double teams, which in theory should open up a lot more opportunities for the other defensive linemen, even the linebackers or even the secondary.
1,000%. And let's just start with Nelson Caesar. I mean, Houston for the last I don't know how many years has had a dominant defensive lineman, and everyone is expecting, and myself included, Nelson Caesar to take that next step. Last year didn't have, I'm sure, the year that he expected, especially when Paris went down. I'm sure he was expecting. He saw even more snaps and thought he would have even a bigger impact. But last year he only had 4 sacks, and I'm sure he wants to double that and have double-digit sacks, where in which he's more than capable. He's a speed rusher with power as well. But I think he's the key. The D line is the key, really, to the entire defense. I mean, and then the next name you go to is Dot. But if Nelson can rush the passer as well as contain the edge and not allow some of these running backs to get on the outside and make longer run, explosive plays in front of the back inside to Dot and to the linebackers, the defense and the cornerbacks won't have to cover as long, and therefore they can make more plays on the football and be more heady. And so the D line aspect is very important, but I'm looking at who is going to be that next name. It seems like year after year, Houston has a player who steps up, and David, I don't want to butcher his last name, the transfer from Oklahoma. I'm hearing a lot about him, and I'm expecting him to have a really big year as well.
Absolutely. We'll get into David a little bit more, but going back to Caesar and Nwankwo, Caesar had 36 total tackles. He had 4 sacks, and he even had a pick for the Houston Cougars a season ago. And Dot, again, this is with him facing a lot of consistent double teams, sometimes even triple teams from opposing offensive linemen. He had 36 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss against opposing offenses, and he also had 1 sack for Houston a season ago. I think, again, David absolutely will get into him in a bit, but those 2 players, from when it comes to returners, I think those 2 stand out when it comes to people to watch for potential breakout seasons. Obviously, of course, both of those players, you imagine, are looking to buff up their resume as they try to really compete at the next level in the NFL. I'm sure both of those players have NFL aspirations after the season, so that's going to be something to keep an eye on. And absolutely, David, I'm gonna try to say his name, and I'm pretty sure David Agwagbu. I'm not sure if we're butchering it, but we'll try to go. We'll just call him David
David,
U
I
for
like
this
that.
show.
Yeah.
But obviously, the big transfer from Oklahoma, and I do say big transfer because he did a lot for the Sooners this past season. He had 109 total tackles, 2 sacks, and look at against the opponents they did. He had 15 tackles against Kansas State. He had 10 tackles against TCU. He had 10 against Texas, and he had 10 against Oklahoma State. Those obviously are big opponents over the course of the season that they had, and he showed out for those big games. He's most definitely going to be a player that, honestly, I think he might be. You can't pencil anyone in. It's still in the preseason, but I think he might be able to have the impact that we saw Derek Parrish have early in the season for Houston.
Yeah, or the likes of Anthony Jones. Both of those players go hand in hand. And I think he said he came to Houston too. He wanted to rush the passer more and develop more as a pass rusher. And what better school to come to than with uh, head coach, well not head coach, defensive line coach, and coach early, excuse me, and be with Sac Ave. And I think his versatility, his athletic ability, his ability to play whatever linebacker spot that you can have will help him and he'll have the athletic advantage against most offensive tackles in the realm of speed. And I think as long as he gets his strength up, man, I think he could be potentially be the defensive MVP this year. I'm expecting big things from him. He knows what it takes to compete against the Big 12 and quality offensive tackles game in and game out. I think he's going to come in and lead by example. And I'm expecting him to have, like you said, that Derek Parrish effect of every play. You're going to be wondering, where's he lining up at? We got to keep an eye on him and game plan against him. I think he can have that type of impact.
Absolutely. Parker Ainsworth's comment, shout out Lockdown Cougs. He says, I've heard it, his last name pronounced Ugwegbu, but he's not sure he's heard him say it. I think that phonically sounds like how you'd be able to say it, but just waiting for the official Houston Cougars. They don't have it on their official site. They need to have pronunciations of players' names. But we'll take your word for it, Parker. But a question he asked: what are we expecting out of all the new edge pass rushers? So many new faces when it comes to, again, just overall for the Houston Cougars team as a whole, specifically when it comes to the defense. I think David, we'll keep calling him David Yu, is most definitely the big name just because of the production he was able to have at Oklahoma and what he did there for the Sooners. And of course, he's familiar with the Big 12. But they have a couple of three freshmen specifically in Ivan Altenrith. Again, we need these pronunciations on the Houston Cougars website. Justin Benton, Joshua Diaz, all three freshmen. Brandon Mack, a transfer out of Ole Miss. He was
Mhm.
he was top 40 in the nation for weak side defensive ends coming out of high school way back in 2020. And of course, Talik Robbins as well, another transfer out of Northeast Mississippi Community College. He actually played for Ole Miss as well the season before that as a freshman, but transferred over and went the JUCO route. So I think most definitely like Parker said, a lot of new faces, but it's going to be interesting to see who's able to step up and make an impact.
My expectation is to have Dot, Brandon Mack at the two interior D line spots, Nelson and David Yu as the pass rushers. And Parker, I'm really, really anxious and excited to see the new pass rushers because Houston has been so good in developing and putting quality pass rushers out on the field and even leading them, helping them get to the next level. I feel like Houston is becoming almost like D line U. I mean, year in, year out, they have a dominant defensive lineman, and I have no expectations but to expect someone to come up and make a name for himself. Now I'm just, who will it be? That's when I'm just looking through the roster, looking through and reading different articles and watching different interviews and seeing who was everyone's talking about. And so those are the players who I'm hearing from the most. And I think Brandon Mack, his experience in the SEC will really, really help him transitioning to play for Houston, but not only that, help him in regards to leadership and helping players like Dot be able to know on the in game basis, hey, this will work for me. There's different nuances that they can give each other, help complement each other really well. But I'm excited really about the D line. I think that's been the strength of the team over the last, I don't know how many years, but the
Brian
D
Hurley
line,
took over.
yep.
You were
I mean,
before that.
yep. I'm really expecting that the D line to really, really continue the tradition that they started and be dominant.
Kevin Jossel again said it's depth concern for the defensive line. I think with a lot of new faces, again, reiterating there's a lot of opportunity for someone to be able to step up and make plays. And specifically when down to your point at D-line university, just think back under early guys like Logan Hall, who rose up through the ranks, was able to get a second round draft pick in the NFL, went second round draft pick in the NFL. And again, even looking last season, Derek Parrish got drafted, although it's not entirely sure if he does end up playing defensive line at the NFL. But even D'Anthony Jones was able to get opportunity as an undrafted free agent once the draft did end. There's certainly a lot of eyeballs when it comes to what Houston has been able to produce, players that they've been able to develop to play at the next level. Now, going back to returners, we focused on Caesar and Dot, but there's a couple names there that might be worth keeping an eye on, just in terms of already obviously been under the system. But I think the biggest returner outside of those two that potentially could have a lot of plays, you got to start with Jamari Caldwell, and had a little bit of limited stretch for Houston a season ago, but he potentially could be someone that finds the niche and is able to make impact plays for the Houston Cougars defensive line in 2023.
And one thing about Coach Belk and the defense, one thing that he does, he rotates players in and out. You're going to
Mhm.
get your chance to be on the field and earn your stay, earn your keep. And so depth is important, but it's allowing that depth to develop by getting experience. So these players, and I'm sure Coach Belk is selling them, like you look at our resume and how we play, how we rotate players in and out, you will have a chance to come in. If you play well, we'll keep you in the game. And so I think having a coach and who has implemented that culture on the defense, I mean, the sky's the limit. I think, like you said, we talked about where the defense was at last year and where then you think about where they were the year before that. That's kind of a blueprint on how to be successful and how important defense is can lead to a championship team, creating turnovers, getting after the quarterback, making not missing as many tackles than you make. And so the defense can only go up, man. I love Coach Doug Bell, the associate head coach, a defensive coordinator. I think he will deservedly be a head coach one day, but I'm excited to see him make his imprint with Houston still to ensure that he is one of the up and coming bright coaches and kind of making his mark and getting Houston defense to that third ward defense and the moniker that they like to use.
Kevin Josso, again on YouTube, talked about the competition. That's been a message that head coach Dana Holgorsen has reiterated over the course of spring practices and even towards the Big 12 Media Day, as Houston is just a few really days away from kicking off training camp and gearing up for the 2023 season. And the big thing for overall the defense as a whole, the big word you can use is opportunity. There's 20 new faces for on this defense, the defense alone, 20 new faces. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity for guys to be able to step up, make plays, and get a consistent rotation spot for the Houston Cougars. There's a lot of unknown, which makes it exciting. At the same time, it makes it a little bit maybe anxious when it looks from a fan standpoint. But I think that's the biggest word, opportunity, that a lot of these players are going to be able to have to step in and make plays for the Houston Cougars in their first year in the Big 12. So kind of putting a bow on it, just overall, the entire defense, what do you think could be some realistic expectations, some goals that the defense overall as a whole should have? And again, there's really only one direction to go from a season ago. I say that kind of in jest, but there has to only be one way, correct?
I agree. I agree. I think for me, I don't necessarily look at yards per game. I think it's important to them to get that turnover margin back up, cause more turnovers, and also the time of possession. I want to see, are they able to get teams off the field on third down? That's one thing they have to be able to do well, is limit teams from having those long sustaining drives to where the defense gets tired and or giving up long explosive plays. And so I think for me, the key on the defense is just making your name, but really taking the game out game. I think they should put an emphasis on, which I'm sure they are, taking the way of football. I mean, you're going to give up a lot of yards. You're going to give up points. I think that's just any given game or football. But one thing that you can do is take the ball away and pressure the quarterback. If they can do those two things, I think Houston can move up and be better than they have last year.
Udayon, you and Kevin are on the same wavelength when it comes to thoughts. He says takeaways will be a must in order for Houston to compete. I agree. That's 100% a key component for the Houston Cougars' success on the defensive side of things. Again, that's something that they struggled in a season ago. But again, kind of piggyback into what you said earlier in the showdown about fundamentals and how important it's going to be able to stop the bleeding, for the lack of a better phrase, specifically when it comes to keeping short, medium-sized plays. Don't allow them to become, 10, 15-yard plays after catches. And that's something that Houston really struggled on the defensive side of things, being able to come up and make tackles and limit plays. And it seemed for a period, certainly a stretch, it didn't matter where opposing offenses started. There was a couple of times when the punter Lane Wilkins would down the opposing offenses inside the 20, inside the 10, sometimes even inside the 5. And sometimes, honestly, it seemed like it wasn't a matter of whether Houston can force a stop and force the opposing team to punt. It just seemed like it was inevitable that at the very least, the offense was going to be able to drive down the field and at least get a field goal, if not punching it into the end zone and score a touchdown. And it came multiple times. When you think of Temple, when you think of even Rice, I don't know, that was a bit of a crazy game, but Rice, they were pinned back and they were able to march down the field, and they came really close to being able to score a touchdown on the final play of the game. And it's a little bit too close for comfort overall. And of course, we saw what the big play for, I keep going back to this play, 4th and 20 against Texas Tech. UTSA had a lot of success against the secondary, so that's going to be the key, in my opinion, for this Houston Cougars defense in 2023. Limiting big plays and keeping the short and medium-sized plays short and medium. Don't allow opposing offense to be able to make chicken salad out of short plays. I will go with the full phrase. Kevin Jossel says going to have to close the gaps to help limit the run, game. Obviously, that's going to be another key thing for the Houston Cougars defense overall as a whole. As we close things down, if you are watching us on YouTube or X or on audio-only platforms, feel free to reach us on social media at Pawd Slama Jama. If you're watching us live, feel free to comment any final takeaways of the defense, anything you're looking forward to for this unit specifically, even a player that you're excited to watch in the 2023 season. Dan, I'll toss it over to you. Any final thoughts on the defense?
Like I said, who amongst the D line is gonna make the name for themselves and become a household name? And then I'm really gonna be keeping a close eye on Jalen Emery. I just think he has a ton of potential. I love his swagger. I love the way he competes, and I think he will get his hands on some footballs this season and catch some interceptions. I'm gonna go for. I believe he'll have at least 3 interceptions this season.
I think overall, I'm going to go with a team goal when it comes to sacks. I think this team overall, I said linebackers, in the secondary a little bit, specifically the defensive line, I think they're potentially going to be more disruptive. I could see them getting into, honestly, 20 sacks as a team, which, again, after Derek Parrish went down, they really struggled to create pressure. So it's going to be something to keep an eye on, how much they're able to be disruptors in the backfield for opposing offenses.